Girl left behind without a name, until a farmer's market vendor gives her everything she never had. Frank Miller was arranging the last boxes of mangoes when he saw the girl. She was sitting on the cold ground of the farmer's market, between the stalls that were already closing, wearing dirty clothes and barefoot. Her big frightened eyes followed every movement around her, as if waiting for someone who never came. It was Thursday, almost 7 in the evening, and the farmer's market in Oakland was emptying out. Frank had been selling fruit there for 48 years and had never seen such a young child alone at that hour. The girl looked about 5 years old and clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. "Where's your mother, little one?" Frank crouched beside her, removing the straw hat he wore every day. The child looked up but didn't answer. She just held out the paper. Frank took it carefully and tried to read the words smudged by moisture. "She doesn't have a name. Take care of her as best you can." Frank's heart tightened. In over 2 decades working at the market, he'd seen a lot, but this was different. The girl shivered in the evening breeze that was starting to roll in. "What do you mean, no name?" he murmured to himself, looking back at the child. She just shook her head, confirming what was written on the paper. Frank felt a lump in his throat. How could someone abandon a child without even giving her a name? "Come on, I'll take you home," he said, reaching out his hand. But the girl shrank back, pressing against the stall's post. Frank realized she was scared and tried a different approach. "Are you hungry?" he asked, grabbing a banana from the nearest box. The child's eyes lit up, and she nodded. Frank peeled the fruit and handed it to her. She ate with a heartbreaking hunger, as if she hadn't eaten in days. As she ate, Frank wondered what to do. He couldn't leave a child there, but he also didn't know how to handle the situation. He lived alone in a small rented apartment and barely made ends meet selling fruit. "What am I supposed to call you if you don't have a name?" he asked, more to himself. The girl finished eating and just stared at him. Frank noticed she had a star-shaped birthmark on her right arm. "Star," he said, smiling for the first time since he'd seen her. "I'll call you Star, okay?" For the first time, the girl gave a shy smile and nodded. Frank finished packing up his things, lifted Star onto his shoulder, and took her home. His apartment was 2 blocks from the market in an old building where he'd lived for 10 years. It was just 2 small rooms, a tiny kitchen and a bathroom, but it was home. "We'll figure things out tomorrow," he said, making an improvised bed for her on the couch. The next morning, Frank woke up early as usual and found Star already awake, sitting on the couch, looking out the window. She hadn't said a word since he found her. "Good morning, Star," he said, heading to the kitchen to make coffee. "You're coming with me to the market today." The girl followed him to the kitchen and watched his every move. Frank made her a banana smoothie and drank his usual black coffee. On the way to the market, he tried talking to Star, but she just listened. He began to suspect she might have trouble speaking. At the market, Star sat in a plastic chair beside Frank's stall and observed everything. Other vendors started asking about her. "Who's the girl, Frank?" asked Mrs. Johnson, who sold vegetables at the next stall. "Found her last night, abandoned," Frank replied, showing her the paper. No name, nothing. Mrs. Johnson, a 65-year-old woman who'd known Frank for over 15 years, was outraged. How could anyone do such a thing? A child with no name, for heaven's sake. "I'm thinking about what to do," said Frank. "I can't keep her. I'm not in a position to." "You should take her to Child Protective Services," suggested Mr. Thompson, who sold fish at the stall across from him. Frank knew that was the right thing to do, but every time he looked at Star, he felt he couldn't hand her over to strangers. The little girl had grown attached to him in a way that touched his heart. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now back to the story. That morning, Frank watched how Star reacted to people. She hid behind him whenever someone approached, but seemed relaxed when they were alone. It was as if she trusted only him. Around noon, a well-dressed woman walked up to his stall. It was Helen Davis, a social worker from the city who made regular rounds at the farmer's market. "Frank, I heard you found a child," she said, eyeing Star with professional concern. "Found her last night," Frank confirmed, showing her the note. "She was abandoned." Helen read the message and shook her head sadly. I'll have to take her with me. She needs to be registered and placed under official protection. Just wait a minute, Frank pleaded, noticing Star hiding behind his leg. She's fine with me. Frank, you know you can't keep her like this. There are procedures to follow. Just a few more days. Let me try talking to her, figure out more about the situation. Helen hesitated. She'd known Frank for years and trusted he was a good man, but the rules were clear. 3 days, she finally said. If you don't bring her to the office by Friday, I'll have to take action. After Helen left, Frank crouched beside Star. Don't worry, little one. I'll figure something out. But inside, he was desperate. He knew his finances didn't allow him to properly care for a child. He barely made enough to cover rent and food. That afternoon, Frank decided to dig deeper into Star's past. He took her around the farmer's market, showing her all the stalls and asking vendors if they'd seen her before. Never seen her around, said Betty, who sold second-hand clothes. Me neither, confirmed Mike from the butcher shop. Then they reached Mrs. Wilson's stall, a 70-year-old woman who sold medicinal plants and always knew everything happening in the area. Oh, I've seen this girl before, Mrs. Wilson said, studying Star closely. She used to walk around the church square with a thin woman, long hair. That was about 2 weeks ago. Frank's heart raced. Finally, a lead. What woman? Do you know her? Not personally, but I've seen her around a few times. She seemed a bit lost, you know, like she was struggling. Do you know where she lives? No, son, but if you want, I can ask my granddaughter. She knows everyone around here. Frank thanked her and left with a glimmer of hope. Maybe he could find the person who'd abandoned Star and understand why. The next day, Friday, Mrs. Wilson came back with news. My granddaughter said the woman's name is Amber. She was renting a small room in the back of Mrs. Baker's house, over on Maple Street. Frank felt a mix of hope and dread. Should he go see this Amber? What if she wanted Star back? What if she was dangerous? I'll go talk to her, Frank decided. Be careful, son, Mrs. Wilson warned. Sometimes it's better to leave things as they are. But Frank had already made up his mind. He closed his stall early and took Star to Maple Street. Mrs. Baker's house was simple, with a peeling green iron gate. Excuse me, Frank called out. An elderly woman with grey hair appeared at the window. What do you want? I'm looking for a girl named Amber. I heard she lived here. Amber left a week ago, replied Mrs. Baker, coming down to open the gate. Why do you ask? Frank explained the situation and showed Star to her. Mrs. Baker put her hand on her chest and widened her eyes. My God, so that's what happened. I knew something was off. What do you mean? Amber had been living here for about 2 months. She arrived with the girl, said she was her daughter. But I always had my doubts. The child didn't look like her and never called her mum. Frank felt each word like a punch to the gut. Do you know where she went? I don't. One night she just vanished, left her things in the room and disappeared. I thought she'd taken the girl with her. What kind of person was this Amber? A bit odd. Always seemed nervous, like she was running from something. Sometimes she'd get calls and get all worked up. Frank thanked her for the information and went home with Star. Now he had more questions than answers. Who was this child really? Why had Amber abandoned her? And more importantly, what should he do now? That night, as Star slept on the couch, Frank kept thinking about the whole situation. He'd grown attached to the girl in a way he hadn't expected. Seeing her smile when she ate a piece of fruit, the way she clung to his leg when she was scared, it all stirred feelings he didn't even know he had. Frank had never married or had kids. He'd always been focused on work, just trying to survive day by day. But now, with Star here, he felt a different purpose in life. On Saturday morning, Helen showed up at the farmer's market. Frank, where's the girl? You promised you'd bring her yesterday. I found out some things about her, said Frank, telling her about Amber and Mrs. Baker. That doesn't change anything. You're in no position to take care of her. What if I get in a position? Helen sighed. Frank, be realistic. You can barely support yourself. A child needs so much more than you can give. Then help me get there. How? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. Helen looked at Star, who was sitting in her little chair, arranging the smaller fruits in neat rows. She really doesn't say anything. Nothing. But she understands everything we say. Could be trauma. Kids sometimes stop talking after going through something really hard. Frank's heart clenched even tighter. What had this child been through to end up like this? Give me a week, Frank pleaded. Just one more week to try and figure things out. Helen glanced around, seeing how the other vendors watched the girl with affection, how she seemed to fit right into that environment. 1 week, she finally agreed. But after that, I won't be able to delay any longer. Over the weekend, Frank thought hard about what to do. He talked to Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Thompson, and other vendors about the situation. They all liked Star, but no one had a practical solution. The problem is money, said Mrs. Johnson. If you could support her properly, you'd be the ideal father. But I can't, Frank admitted. I can barely pay my rent. What if we all pitched in? Suggested Mr. Thompson. I won't take charity, Frank said proudly. It's not charity, it's solidarity, Mrs. Johnson corrected. We all want to help. But Frank knew a collection would only be a temporary fix. He needed something more permanent. On Monday, as he set up his stall, Frank had an idea. What if he expanded his business? Maybe he could get a better spot at the market, sell more varieties of fruit, increase his income. He went to talk to the market manager, Mr. Charles, about the possibility. Frank, you know there's a huge waiting list for better spots, said Mr. Charles, and even if there weren't, you'd have to prove your income to qualify. But what if I found a partner, someone with more money? Then it would be different. But who'd want to partner with a vendor at the farmer's market? Frank returned to his stall, feeling discouraged. It seemed like every door was closing on him. Just then, a well-dressed man in a suit and tie appeared, carefully examining the fruit. Your mangoes look very nice, the man said. Where do you buy them? Directly from the grower in Fresno, Frank replied. I go there twice a week. Interesting, I own a chain of markets in the area. Maybe we could do business. Frank's heart raced. Could this be the opportunity he'd been waiting for? What kind of business? You could supply me with premium fruit. I'd pay better than market prices, but I'd demand consistent quality. How much better? The man, who introduced himself as Richard Taylor, did some quick math and showed Frank. It was nearly double what he usually made. But there are some conditions, Richard said. You'd need an EIN, issue invoices, guarantee regular deliveries. Frank felt the ground slip from under him. All these requirements seemed impossible. I don't know if I can manage all that, he admitted. Think it over, Richard said, handing him a card. It's a good opportunity. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Frank talked to Star about the offer, even though he knew she wouldn't answer. What do you think, little one? Is it worth trying? Star looked at him with her big, serious eyes, as if she understood the weight of the moment. Frank decided to seek help. He went to the Vendors Association, where he got information on how to get an EIN and formalize his business. He learned he'd need an accountant, paperwork, and an initial investment he didn't have. Just as he was about to give up, Mrs. Johnson showed up at his house on Tuesday night. Frank, we need to talk, she said seriously. What is it, Mrs. Johnson? It's about Star. I've been thinking a lot and I have a proposal. Frank's heart pounded. What proposal? My husband and I are retired. We have a big house, no children. What if we adopted her? The world seemed to stop for Frank. Part of him knew this would be best for Star, but another part shattered at the thought. You can give her more than I can, he admitted, swallowing the lump in his throat. It's what's best for her, Frank, you know that. Can I still see her? Of course. You'll always be special to her. Frank looked at Star, who was drawing on the couch. How could he be so selfish to keep her when others could offer so much more? Let me think about it until tomorrow, he said. Mrs. Johnson nodded and left, leaving Frank in terrible anguish. On Wednesday, Frank was torn between accepting Mrs. Johnson's offer or trying something with Richard Taylor. He decided to call the businessman and explain his situation. Listen, Frank, Richard said over the phone. I like the quality of your fruit. How about this? You find a partner with money for the paperwork, and I'll guarantee contracts for a year. But where would I find a partner? That's up to you. The offer stands until Friday. Frank hung up even more confused. He had until Thursday to figure everything out before Helen came back for Star. Then he had a desperate idea. What if he tracked down Amber, the girl who'd abandoned Star? Maybe she knew something about the child's real family. He went back to Mrs. Baker's house to try and get more information. Did Amber leave anything in the room, any documents? She did. I even kept it thinking she'd come back. Mrs. Baker brought out a bag with some old clothes and a small notebook. Frank flipped through the address book and found some names and phone numbers. Can I jot down these contacts? You can take the book. If she comes back, I'll explain. Frank spent the afternoon calling the numbers in the book. Most didn't answer or didn't know Amber, but on the last number, a woman picked up. Amber? Oh, honey, she's in the hospital. Frank's heart nearly stopped. Where is she? At Memorial Medical Center. She had a really bad nervous breakdown. She's been there for a week. Frank got the room number, and on Thursday morning he went to the hospital with Star. He found a thin woman with long hair, just as Mrs. Wilson had described. Amber? The woman looked up, and when she saw Star, she started crying uncontrollably. I knew you'd show up, she said between sobs. I couldn't take care of her. Why did you abandon her? Because she's not my daughter, Amber confessed. I found her in a church square 3 months ago, abandoned too. Frank felt the world spin. What do you mean? She was alone, crying with a dirty diaper. No one was around. I took her home, tried to care for her, but I can't. I don't have a home, a job, nothing. Why didn't you seek official help? Because I'm afraid of the police. I've had some trouble with drugs, and I thought they'd arrest me. Frank looked at Star, who watched everything in silence. That child had been abandoned twice. Do you know where she originally came from? No. When I found her, she only had a diaper and a note that said, "Take good care of her." Nothing else. And why didn't you say that in the note you left? I was really sick, confused. I just wanted someone to care for her better than I could. Frank left the hospital with more questions than answers. Now he knew Star had been abandoned not once, but twice, and he still had no idea who her real parents were. It was Thursday afternoon, and Helen would arrive Friday morning to pick up Star. Frank had less than 24 hours to figure it all out. He decided to try one last move. He called Richard Taylor and set up an urgent meeting. Richard, I need a partnership today. Do you know anyone who could be my partner? Frank, it doesn't work like that. A partnership takes trust, planning. I know, but I'm desperate. It's about the girl living with me. Frank told Richard the whole story, and he was moved by the situation. Look, I have a brother who's retired and has some money sitting around. I can talk to him, but I can't promise anything. Please, it's my last chance. Richard called his brother right in front of Frank. The conversation lasted 15 minutes, and Frank could only catch a few words. He agreed, Richard said, hanging up. But he wants to meet you and the girl first. When? Now. He's on his way here. Half an hour later, a well-dressed man in his 60s with a kind face arrived. I'm Jack Wilson, he said, shaking Frank's hand. Richard told me your story. Frank introduced Star, who, as usual, hid behind his leg. She's very shy, Frank explained. Understandable after what she's been through, Jack said, crouching to her level. Hi, Star. How are you? To everyone's surprise, Star nodded and didn't hide. Interesting, Jack murmured. She has a very intelligent look. So what do you think of the proposal? Richard asked. I'll be direct, Jack said. I'm not interested in making money from fruit, but I am interested in helping a child. I'll agree to the partnership if Frank guarantees he'll use the money to take good care of her. Frank felt tears in his eyes. I guarantee. It's all I want. Then let's get the paperwork done today. I know an accountant who can handle everything in a few hours." They spent the rest of the afternoon at notary offices and offices. By 8 that night, Frank had his EIN, his business registered, and a supply contract signed with Richard. "Now you're in a position to keep her," said Jack, smiling. But Frank knew he still had to convince Helen the next morning. Early on Friday, Helen arrived at the farmer's market as promised. "Frank, don't tell me you still haven't sorted this out." "I have," said Frank, showing all the documents. "Now I have a business, proven income, and the means to care for her." Helen examined the papers carefully. "This is impressive, Frank, but still you're single. You have no experience with children." "He won't be alone," interrupted Mrs. Johnson, who had just arrived. "Everyone at the market will help take care of Star." "It's true," confirmed Mr. Thompson. "That girl is already our little mascot." Helen looked around and saw all the vendors nodding in agreement. Star was in the middle of them all, finally smiling openly. "Even so, there's the legal matter. She has no documents. We don't know who her parents are." "We can get the documents," said Frank. "Register her as my adopted daughter." "It's not that simple." "Helen," interrupted Mrs. Wilson, arriving with a folder in hand. "I brought something that might interest you." She opened the folder and showed a newspaper clipping from 3 months ago. "Remember when I said I'd seen the girl before? Well, I asked my granddaughter to look through local newspapers. Take a look at this." The headline read, "Family searches for daughter missed in bus accident." Frank read the article with his heart racing. A family from Pasadena had lost their 5-year-old daughter in a bus accident that happened exactly 3 months ago. The child had a star-shaped birthmark on her right arm. "It's her," whispered Frank, looking at the mark on Star's arm. Helen took the newspaper and read it carefully. According to this, the parents are Mark and Patricia Wilson. They live in Highland Park. Frank felt his world collapse. After everything they'd been through, Star had a family looking for her. "We'll have to contact them," said Helen. "I know," murmured Frank, holding the girl's hand. "It's the right thing to do." But inside he was shattered. He'd grown attached to Star in a way he never thought possible. Helen called the number listed in the newspaper. A woman answered, crying when she heard they had news about her daughter. "We're coming right now," said the voice on the phone. "I can't believe our Sophie is alive." Sophie. So that was Star's real name. An hour later, a desperate couple arrived at the market. The woman, Patricia, burst into tears when she saw the girl. "Sophie, my baby!" But to everyone's surprise, the girl didn't react. She looked at her parents with the same frightened expression she'd had when she first met Frank. "She doesn't recognize you," observed Helen. "It could be the trauma," explained Mark, the father. "She hit her head in the accident. Maybe she has amnesia." Frank watched the scene with a broken heart. He could see these people loved the girl, but she clearly didn't remember them. "Sophie, it's me, Mommy," said Patricia, stepping forward slowly. The girl hid behind Frank, as she always did when scared. "She trusts you," Mark said to Frank. "How did you manage that?" "I was just kind to her," replied Frank, stroking the girl's hair. "How long has she been with you?" "A week." "And in a week, you've made more progress than the doctors did in 3 months," murmured Patricia. "What do you mean?" "Sophie was hospitalized before the accident. She had emotional issues. She wouldn't talk to anyone. The accident made it worse." Frank began to understand. The girl had already been struggling before she was abandoned. Maybe that's why she didn't react to her parents. Can I suggest something?" Frank said hesitantly. "Of course," replied Mark. "What if you visited her here a few times before taking her home, so she can get used to you slowly?" Patricia and Mark exchanged glances. "That makes sense," agreed Patricia. "We don't want to traumatize her even more." Helen, who was observing everything, intervened. "It's a good idea. We can do a supervised transition period." Over the following weeks, Mark and Patricia visited Sophie every day at the farmer's market. Gradually, the little girl grew accustomed to them. Frank helped with the transition, always there to give her a sense of security. "You're an angel," Patricia told Frank after 2 weeks. "You took care of her better than we ever could." "You're her parents," Frank replied. "I was just borrowing some love." But inside, every day was agony. He knew he would soon lose the girl he had learned to love as his own. It was during the third week that something unexpected happened. Sophie finally spoke. "Frank," she said, clear as day. Everyone was stunned. It was the first word she had spoken since the accident. "She said my name," Frank whispered, emotional. "Frank," Sophie repeated, holding his hand. Patricia burst into tears. She spoke. After months of silence. In the days that followed, Sophie began speaking more, always addressing Frank first, then her parents. It was as if he were her bridge to the world. "Daddy Frank," she said one day, leaving everyone surprised. "I think she's confused about who's who," Helen explained, but Frank knew it wasn't confusion. To Sophie, he had truly become a father, and the Wilsons were starting to understand that too. "Frank," Mark said one Thursday, "Patricia and I have talked a lot. We want to make you an offer." "What offer?" "We want you to stay in Sophie's life. As a godfather, a special uncle. You gave our daughter back to us. We don't want to lose you too." Frank felt overwhelming emotion. He wouldn't have to choose between his love for Sophie and what was right. "It would be an honor," he replied, tears in his eyes. "Daddy Frank," Sophie said, hugging his leg. "Stay with me?" "I'll always stay with you, Star," he said, using the name he had given her. "I mean Sophie." "I like Star too," she said, smiling. "So you have two names," Patricia said, laughing through tears. "Sophie at home, Star here at the market." In the months that followed, they settled into a special routine. Sophie lived with her parents, but spent every afternoon at the market with Frank. He taught her about fruit, about life, about kindness. She taught him about unconditional love. Frank's business thrived with Jack's partnership. He managed to rent a bigger apartment and even thought about moving closer to the Wilson family. "You don't have to," Mark said. "We're thinking of moving closer to the market. Sophie gets so anxious when it takes too long to see you." And so the Wilson family rented a house just 3 blocks from the market. Sophie came and went on her own, running to hug Frank every afternoon. "Daddy Frank, I brought you a drawing," she'd say, showing off her artwork. "It gets more beautiful every day," he'd reply, pinning each drawing to a makeshift board at his stall. A year after the day he found her, Frank threw a party at the market to celebrate. All the vendors joined in, Sophie's parents brought a cake, and Helen stopped by to see how everything was going. "I've never seen a story with such a beautiful ending," Helen told Frank. "Ending?" Frank laughed. "This is just the beginning." Sophie, now 6 years old, climbed onto a crate at the stall and shouted to the whole market, "My Daddy Frank is the best daddy in the world." "And our Sophie is the best daughter in the universe," Frank called back. Mrs. Johnson wiped her eyes with her apron. "That little girl changed everyone here," she said. "Even Mr. Thompson has been sweeter since she arrived." And it was true. Sophie had transformed the market's dynamic. Everyone treated her like a granddaughter, protecting her, spoiling her. It was impossible to walk through without seeing her running between stalls, helping here and there, always with her bright smile. "Frank," Patricia said one evening, "Mark and I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Would you be Sophie's official godfather? At the wedding, she can walk you down the aisle along with me and Mark." Frank didn't understand. "What wedding?" "Ours. We're getting married again to celebrate our family being reunited, and we want you to be an official part of the ceremony." On the wedding day, held in the little square by the farmer's market, Sophie wore a simple white dress and walked 2 people down the aisle. Her mother, Patricia, and her godfather, Frank. Mark waited at the altar with the priest. "Today, we celebrate not just a wedding," the priest said, "but a family formed through love, loss, and reunion." During the ceremony, Sophie never let go of Frank's hand. When it was time for the vows, Mark asked to speak. "Patricia, I promise to love you and our daughter forever. And Frank, I promise to share Sophie with you for the rest of our lives, because we know love doesn't shrink when it's divided, it multiplies." There wasn't a dry eye in the square. After the ceremony, while everyone celebrated, Sophie pulled Frank aside. "Daddy Frank, now you're my official godfather?" "I sure am, my little star." "So you won't leave me anymore?" "Never again. I promise." I promise I'll never leave you either." Frank hugged her, overwhelmed with gratitude for this little girl who had come into his life nameless and given him a purpose he hadn't even known he was searching for. 2 years later, Frank and Sophie had developed their own rituals. Every morning she helped set up the stall. Every afternoon he helped with her homework. Every evening he went to dinner at the Wilsons' house. "Have you noticed what a strange family we are?" Patricia would laugh. "But it's ours." Sophie, now 8, had become one of the most popular kids at school. She always told everyone about her godfather, the farmer's market vendor who had given her a name and a home when she had nothing. "My godfather found me when I was lost and taught me how to find myself," she wrote in her school essays. One day, a teacher asked to speak with Sophie's parents. "I'd love to understand her story better," the teacher said. "She talks about her godfather with so much love. I'm curious." Mark and Patricia told the whole story, from the accident to the reunion. "What an incredible story," the teacher said. "Sophie is one of the most well-adjusted kids in class. It must be all that love she gets." "She deserves it," Patricia said. "She's been through so much. We make sure to make up for it now." "And the godfather is still around." "Every single day," Mark laughed. "Sometimes I think Sophie likes him more than us." It was true. The bond between Frank and Sophie was special, different from the love for her parents, but just as strong. They had their own codes, inside jokes, and traditions only they understood. Every Friday, for example, Frank closed the stall early and took Sophie for ice cream at the corner shop. It was their time alone, where they talked about everything: school, friends, dreams, fears. "Daddy Frank, when I grow up, I want to work with you at the market," she said one Friday. "You can work wherever you want, Star. You're smart enough for anything." "But I like the market. I like the people, the fruit, everything." "Then when you finish school, the stall will be waiting for you." Frank had started a savings account for Sophie, depositing a portion of his profits every month. He wanted to make sure she had opportunities to study and choose her own path. "One day you'll go to college," he'd say, "and will you come with me? Wherever you go, I'll be cheering for you." When Sophie turned 10, Frank threw her a surprise party at the market. He decorated all the stalls with colorful banners and invited her entire class. "Daddy Frank, you're the best godfather in the world," she shouted, hugging him in front of all their friends. "And you're the sweetest-hearted daughter anyone could ask for," he replied. That day, as he watched Sophie playing with her friends among the stalls of the farmer's market that had become her second home, Frank reflected on how much life had changed. 7 years ago, he was just a lonely vendor. Now, he had a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every day with joy. "What are you thinking about?" asked Mrs. Johnson, noticing his thoughtful gaze. "Just remembering the day I found her right there," said Frank, pointing to the spot where he'd discovered Sophie. "Who'd have thought a lost little girl would teach me so much about being found?" "I think you found each other," said Mrs. Johnson, wise as ever. "That's true. She gave me a name, too." "What do you mean?" "Before her, I was just Frank. Now I'm Papa Frank. It's a new identity, more important than the old one." Sophie ran up to them, her face smeared with chocolate from the cake. "Papa Frank, all my friends want to see your stall. Then let's give them a tour," he said, winking at Mrs. Johnson. And off Frank went, showing 10 10-year-olds how to pick the best mango, how to tell if a banana is ripe, how to peel a pineapple. Sophie followed proudly, filling in his explanations. "My godfather knows everything about fruit," she said. "He's the smartest at the market." By evening, when all the friends had left, Sophie helped Frank clean up the stall. "Papa Frank, thank you for the most beautiful party of my life. You deserve every celebration in the world, my little star. Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever miss having real kids?" Frank stopped what he was doing and looked at her carefully. "Sophie, you are my real child. You might not have been born from me, but you were born in my heart, and that's the only truth that matters. So can I just call you Dad sometimes?" "You already call me Papa Frank. That's perfect as it is. But what if I just say Dad sometimes? It'd be the greatest honor of my life." That night, when Frank arrived at the Wilsons' house for dinner, Sophie made an announcement. "Mom and Dad," she said, looking at Mark and Patricia, "I want you to know that Papa Frank is my dad too. I have 2 dads and 1 mom. I'm the luckiest kid in the world." Mark and Patricia smiled, having expected this moment. "We've always known," said Patricia, "and we're happy you're sure of it too." "Frank," said Mark, "officially, you're part of our family. You always have been, really." Frank felt an emotion he couldn't put into words. At 55, he'd found not just a daughter, but an entire family. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me be part of all this." "Thank you," said Patricia, "for saving our daughter when we couldn't. For giving her what she needed most when she needed it most," Mark added. Sophie looked at the 3 adults she loved. "Can we eat now? I'm hungry, and there's leftover cake from the party." Everyone laughed, and they dined as they did every night, like a family that had found each other in an unconventional way, but loved each other in the most genuine way possible. Years later, when Sophie was a teenager, she wrote a school essay about heroes. She chose to write about Frank. "My hero doesn't wear a cape or have superpowers. He wears a straw hat and sells fruit at a farmer's market. When I was little and lost, he found me. But really, I think we found each other. He taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about love. He taught me that a name isn't just a word, but a promise that you exist and matter. He taught me that kindness is the only thing that truly multiplies when you share it. My hero gave me a name when I didn't have one. But more importantly, it gave me a reason to be proud of this name." The teacher, moved, asked Sophie to read her essay to the class. When she finished, the room fell silent. "Sophie," said one of her classmates, "your godfather must be really special." "Yes," she replied, smiling, "and he doesn't even know how special he is. He thinks he just did what anyone would do. But that's not true. He did what only a real father would do." That afternoon, Sophie rushed to the farmer's market as she always did after school. "Papa Frank," she called out, hugging him, "I wrote about you at school." "About me? Why?" "Because you're my hero." Frank felt his eyes well up, as they always did when Sophie said things like that. "You're the one who's my hero, Star. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "How did I save you?" "You taught me that life has meaning when you have someone to love and care for. You taught me that being a father doesn't need paperwork, it just needs heart." Sophie smiled and began arranging the fruit, just as she had done since she was little. At 15, she already knew the business better than most adults. "Papa Frank, I still want to work with you when I grow up, and I'll still be here waiting for you, my girl." Because in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. They were father and daughter, bound not by chance but by the love they chose to nurture every day since that Thursday, when a nameless little girl met a man willing to give her everything she'd never had. The end. So, what did you think of this touching story? Tell us in the comments which part moved your heart the most. Did Frank make the right choice by fighting to stay with Sophie? And did the girl's parents act wisely by including him in the family? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story of love, loss, and reunion. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heartwarming stories.